Hello, it's Michael here. Welcome to today's episode where I would like to cover the obvious things. As you can see behind me, there's yet another background, and believe me, this will be changing because almost every subsection of each episode will be shot in a different location. So, what I'm going to be talking about today, I'm going to be talking about writing down the obvious things. And here I'd like to divide it into some subsections. The first one will be writing things down because we would like to memorize them quicker. Then writing things down because we need to retrieve them later on. And here the smart idea is, how do we write down as much information as possible without using too much energy on it? Then of course we'll transition to writing things down because it's part of a quality control system. And in this case, it's kind of important that we actually do log the data. And when do we have to log too much of the data? And the last one, yes, it's not obvious, but it should be at some point. It's writing down things so that they can be a part of an event system. And this is because the things that we write down, we'll be reminded about them if some other conditions are fulfilled. So, if that sounds interesting, let's get to the core. So, let's get to the core with the first part of what I wanted to talk about. But before we do this, I actually forgot about something. When I was talking about the things I'll be talking about in today's episode, I forgot about one very important thing. It is, we write things also down when we want to make sure we execute them. Of course, whether we do this later on, it's a different story, but writing things down helps with the execution phase. And research says it's actually up to 62%. The chances grow when we actually write things down. But you can see what I did actually, I didn't take notes in the proper format. I was using my telephone to look up into my notes. And obviously, small screen, I felt also a bit of a pressure. I forgot about this point. So now you know how I also film my episodes. These are takes I really cannot repeat because, well, I'm missing the beautiful background. Okay, but let's go to the core. The first thing I'd like to talk about is the obvious thing that we ignore. It's writing things down in order to remember something. And here I'm actually talking about the learning process. When we write things down in the old-fashioned way, pen and paper, it's actually proven that we get a cognitive boost. We simply remember more. The question is, okay, it's so obvious. Why do you mention it? Simply because we ignore it. We ignore it way too often. Even I did it. I did it this year, and I did it actually in a considerable way. So what I did is actually, I decided that it's the best moment to learn the fifth language. So I started my adventure with Spanish, and I started learning it. And I was thinking like, okay, let's use the advantage of the 21st century. So I used all the colorful apps and other places where you can learn different languages and do different things. And well, I did learn something, but the effect was far from something I was actually happy with. So what I did is I thought like, hey, but there is this old-fashioned way of going back to the, pen and paper and buying a book, and what's most important, buying the exercise book, because that's exactly what I did. So I started my lessons, and I have a regular pen and paper where I'm actually writing down all my notes and doing all my lessons. And I also bought the exercise book, and I must admit that it simply works. I get the cognitive boost. But okay, you probably ask me, or probably you would like to ask me, fine, what with other things that we write down? For example, calendar notes. How about meetings? How about notes from meetings, for example? Well, when it comes to calendar notes, it's a different story. Basically, you have to remember that the method there is to help you. You are not there to be for the method. So you have to also a little bit listen to yourself and figure out, okay, does it really work for me? Is it the thing that I want? Does it help me with my day? Yes. Does it give me my flow? And you are the only person that can help you with that, because you have to listen to yourself. What really helps is to try the different methods. For example, writing down things with the calendar. If we take a look from purely research perspective, you write things down. Some of that is left in your memory. And that's pretty important, because you don't check your calendar 24/7. So a little bit of that memory that you probably have a meeting, it should be there. And this is actually a good thing, because that means something here will remind you about that meeting or something else you were supposed to do. I personally use electronic calendars in the cloud, which are available on my telephone, on my PC, anywhere else where I log in. They are also on my watch, but I will talk about the watch later on. I have a semi-smartwatch, which is a little bit dumb, but that was actually the idea. I want the watch to remind me only about most important things for me. SMSs, calls, calendars. Okay, and that I have to actually move a little bit more than back and forth to the coffee machine. So it is a good thing to pick what really suits you. And now, a lot of people say learning by doing. Yes, they are right. And also you have to try different methods and see what really goes with you. A lot of people talk about you need to get to the flow. Yes, but what does it mean? Well, the flow means that you try different methods. Ergo, you have to have some knowledge. You have to do some research to gather all the methods. And you have to fail with many of them until you find the one that actually really works. And this is what I did. I tried a lot of these methods. I had paper calendar, I had notes, I was doing different kinds of things. And in the end, I ended up with the electronic calendar, and that is working on my phone, and with the notifications that actually come up on my little watch. Okay, so we have the calendar thing, which is one of the obvious things off the list. I don't think I have to mention why we have to write things in our calendars. If we don't write them down, we will forget them. And the other thing, which I just also demonstrated in the previous take, we will most likely forget about them because we will not execute. So yes, it's pretty important to write this down. Now we come to another place. Meetings. Well, in general, meetings are the source of non-productivity, as a lot of people will say. I must agree, it's true. They actually, yes, they result in a lot of nothing to do time. So it's very important that the meetings are actually done correctly. And let me guess, if you are an entrepreneur, you have a meeting with your customer, you're probably very good at doing the meeting relatively fast and making sure that you capture what you need. Now the question is, how do you take the notes? Well, if you take the notes on the paper, that's okay. But remember that then some of that stuff is going to be left in your head. And I started optimizing my things when I read the book by David Allen called GTD, Getting Things Done. I decided that, okay, all this stuff I don't have to remember by heart, out of my head. Well, so how do I take notes for meetings with my customers? Very simple. I usually take notes in FEHub. So when I meet with a customer, and this is some kind of a bigger job or something else that I can capture, you decide how you want to do this. But recently, I simply create the project, and all the tasks I create within that project, and I describe them. I can type extremely fast on a keyboard. So I actually try to capture all the nuances of the task and write them down in the FEHub, in the project. This way, I don't have to remember about the priority, possible deadlines. Actually, after the meeting, I completely forget what I was supposed to do. And all that stuff around, the metadata, like what was the customer name, what kind of stuff they have that has to be done, when, are there any dependencies? This is already out of my head. I only plan when I have to start tackling the next task. This way, actually, my head gets free. So, yeah, this is the way I actually sort this out and keep my head free of noise. Okay, but what if you need to take notes anyway, because you would like to learn and still remember a little bit, have a little bit of that cognitive boost, but still you need to take notes in an electronic fashion? Well, there exists e-paper, so no problem there. You just go and do it. And if you really need to take notes in something like online docs or offline docs, whatever, make sure you use cognitive help for that. By cognitive, of course, means colors, shapes, different things. This is also how I'm doing graphs. If I have to do graphs, I actually put them in a program called Sketchbook, and this is where I draw things. It's also nice because they have a set of shapes that mimic our handwriting, which makes it even better, kind of like cheating your brain a little bit, but it actually works very well for me. It could maybe work also for you in that case. So, to sum it up, try the different methods, figure out what really works for you, but make sure that you make some algorithmical decisions when you commit. That means, do I really want to learn something? Like, for example, I'm learning Spanish. Yes, then I take the extra mile. I use the regular pen and paper. I fill out the exercise book on a regular basis. I do that stuff. If it's a calendar, for me, works the electronic version way better. When it's meetings with customers, I would be too slow to write it down on paper, and I seriously don't want to remember it. Another thing is, when I write this down, this is something I didn't mention previously, I try to describe it like for a 5-year-old, which means there is no place for ambiguity. Since I can type extremely fast on the keyboard, I can write a lot of stuff. And this is what I do. I actually write obvious stuff in these descriptions, because when I read it later on, I get all the extra context, and suddenly, hey, that's exactly what I was supposed to do. So, find out the stuff that works for you, and don't be afraid to fail, because that's exactly what I did. I failed multiple times before I found my method that works for me. And now it sounds so easy and so obvious, but we tend to ignore it in our regular life. So find your method, and remember, you get a cognitive boost when you write things down in a traditional way. And as I mentioned, David Allen, getting things done. I will make a separate episode just about that, but there is a way, there is a system how you can actually completely clean your head and focus on that's what's important for you. So, I've covered the first method. Okay, let's take the next part. Documenting things that we need for our work. Some stuff that we need for future retrieval. This is a different type of logging, or actually I would call it something like logging that we need in the future. This is kind of different from the calendar that I mentioned in the previous section, but it's very similar to what I described about the projects. So, an obvious thing could be we have a task, and we bill the customer by the hour. So the idea is, how much do we have to bill? Of course, if you think about doing this by hand, writing it down in a notebook, well, this is going to backfire very soon. I did that before, doesn't work, and gives you a huge pain when you want to do any kind of statistics, and then at the end of the month, you have to go through all the papers and sum up everything. Believe me, sooner or later, you'll figure out that you will use a lot of time on invoicing, and nobody pays you for running your company. So this is something that can be automated. So this section is going to be about actually logging and doing it in a smart way and using tools that are actually right for the job. Good. Before I go, we are extremely bad at estimating things. We people, we think we know everything, But when it comes to estimation, we are unable to even predict basic things. The other thing is also we are extremely biased. We think we have an overview and we don't. I'll show an example. Take a look at this lovely bread, which I'm gonna eat in a moment. But tell me, how much does it weigh? Unless you are a professional dietitian, no idea. Let's up the game. How many kilocalories are if I actually use the knife, which I have on my right side, and cut a sandwich? Again, no idea. The same thing happens with the time. We think we know what is going on with the time, but actually we don't. So we have to measure it in some way. Of course, you could say, yes, I use a spreadsheet. Well, a spreadsheet will backfire also very soon, because you will figure out as soon as you lose the file, it's going to go out. Okay, you will say, but I'm using online spreadsheets. This is not going to go away. You're right. But your customers, will they get access to your spreadsheet? Do you really want to share it? How much information are you able to write down in that spreadsheet? Can you share it? Well, you can, but the question is, do you really want to? This is the place, again, where I'm using our own product, EfiHub, because it allows me to actually record the time, because I'm using a built-in timer, and I can also share my tasks with my customers if they want it. So they don't have to call me. They can basically 24/7 go there themselves and check it up. See, I'm logging all my time. The customers, they have 24/7 access to it, and this costs me almost nothing extra in terms of used time. When it comes to invoicing, because everything is written down in a smart system, it can be easily invoiced. So back in the days when I was using 100% of my time on consulting, or at least close to 100%, I was sending invoices that were sometimes 25 pages long. Why? My customers wanted to have description of every task. No problem. Invoice is 25 pages, but it comes there. You know exactly how much time I used on every task. You know exactly how much you're paying for it. But you ask me probably, how much time did I use in this? Less than 10 minutes every month. And now, every now and then, I'm still doing some consultancy, and it's exactly the same story. I use actually less than 2 minutes on invoicing every month. This makes, of course, my job very easy. Another thing is what I mentioned about projects. There is a lot of metadata which is being registered in EfiHub in this case automatically, because when I start tracking a task, I can connect the customer to it. I can also connect some further description. I have everything in the right place. I have the proximity of data, so I don't have to look for it any further. What really also helps me here is that I have one place where I have it. And you would think like, okay, but with a little bit of organization, you could actually have it in a spreadsheet. You're right. Last year, when I was on holidays on Tenerife, unfortunately, 1.5 days before going back home, I was robbed. I lost all my documents. So in less than 2 minutes, I became Mr. Nobody and had absolutely no credit cards. All of my documents, including my passport, went away. So yes, I don't really remember much from that time, because that was pretty traumatizing for me. And to be honest, we have a feature in EfiHub which of course automatically tracks the time that I have invoiced and the time that I have not invoiced. And believe me or not, at the end of August, I actually found out that I didn't send any invoices at the time when I was robbed. So if I was relying on my own head in that case, I would be quite a lot of money behind, and probably I would find it out at some point later in the time. But that's going to be also kind of difficult to take it with the customer at that point, saying like, you know, half a year ago, I actually forgot to invoice you. Most of the customers, of course, will pay, but it kind of like puts you in a bad situation anyway. Okay, so we have it. We are bad at estimation. we kind of tend to forget things, and this is okay, because the whole point is about finding the right tools for the right job. And this is what I was doing. For many years, I've been trying different solutions, and since I couldn't find anyone, together with my co-founders, we decided to actually build FEHub so that we could capture this functionality. Okay, so you will probably ask me, how about this logging thing? What other things you can discover with that? Is there any limit here? Yes, there is. Basically, with writing things down, you can discover almost everything. Because if there is any kind of overview you'd like to have over a process, if there's anything you would like to improve, you have to have this overview. You have to have some data that you can analyze later on. Gathering the data, logging it, this process can be expensive, and it usually actually means you need a little bit more. And I was telling before you about the bread, which is now next to me. What's so funny about this is that we are also very biased. You can try this experiment at home. Try to weigh everything you eat for a day. And if you are on any kind of a diet or something else, or not, you'll figure out that suddenly, hey, I'm eating much less. Yes, because for the first time in a long time, you're actually aware of what is going in your mouth and how much it is. And you will suddenly figure out that, oh, that lovely sausage, I should probably eat much less of it. Or that fantastic cheese. These are some of my best products, of course. These things, they can be optimized also in a different way, because you can learn how to estimate things, and you can learn how to do the so-called best effort estimation. For example, in terms of food, as I said, if you try to weigh it out, you will see that you will eat much less. And how can you actually get control over that without being stressed and without actually having to use all the time? Because that's going to be a lot of time, and a lot of time that is actually wasted when you log this, because it's going to take, you have to put it on a scale, you have to write it down. Even worse if you have to calculate the kilocalories, yes, because then you have to go to the facts sheet and see exactly the nutritional values and so on. So yes, how to do this? In that case, I actually went to a dietitian and I asked, is there any solution to that problem? And she used her own experience and told me that, yes, Michael, you can learn how to divide things in your plate. And if you learn those basic tricks, it's going to be much easier for you to do this when you don't have access to scale, if you're in different places and so on. And after a little bit of practicing, of course, that worked out very well for me, because at some point, a few years ago, I had a situation when I really couldn't buckle myself in the plane. Now it's much different. I have a lot of space still available in the seatbelt. Good. So again, back to the logging. If you log too much, you're going to waste a lot of time. So the whole point is to find the sweet balance, the sweet spot in logging. Log exactly what you have to, and use all the automation tools that are available to capture all the metadata around it so that it can aid you in that. But there are situations where you really have to grasp yourself and log too much. But this is something that you do in short periods of time, because these are like test periods. You need to gather some data so that later on you can get an overview, and from the data you can actually deduct some information, because data on its own is just a lot of information. Data on its own is just facts. When you arrange it, you actually get information. So this is exactly the same situation in, for example, IT systems, yes? We have a lot of services, and you probably have heard about the process called debugging, which means that we are trying to find out what kind of mistakes we've made in the code. But the process of debugging very often either means that we are logging a lot of information, for example, on disk in a text file, or in a different place, or we have a debugger, a process that is actually, supervising the original program so that we know exactly what is going on. But these things, they put a huge strain on the system. And that means, for example, if we have a high volume, high transaction database, if we enable verbose logging, the system is going to crash, because the logging thing is going to slow it down up to a point that it's not going to work anymore. And this is this works exactly the same in terms of us. We are going to be slowed down. So if you log, and if you want to log verbosely, do this, but do it in a short period of time. Later on, analyze the data. And here comes one more lesson, which I learned in a very hard way. A lot of people don't do the obvious thing. When things go completely wrong, like, absolutely wrong, they go in a panic state. It's like, oh my God, they try to fix everything and it's not really working well, and they forget about still logging what they are doing. When things go wrong, when literally, that's the situation when you still have to log it, because it's only there that you will learn what kind of accidents can happen, how much time they took, and how it is going to affect your bottom line. And this is very important also in terms of projects, because if you do time tracking on your projects, and if you have an overview of your projects, because this is also the added value of actually using smart tools for logging your tasks, is also that I can log, for example, an FE Hub at any time of the day or night, and I can check exactly how much money I have to invoice at the end of the month, where I stand with the project. Is this project still profitable? You would be surprised how many companies don't track, for example, bigger contracts, and they are kind of like, what's the profitability on that particular contract? So this is actually really important, tracking this and having also the insight. And this is one of the places when doing this electronically, it's almost a must, because you get so much of the extra added value. It's really worth it. So this is the logging thing of stuff that is very important. And my idea was to tell you also that, yes, we are very wrong at the estimation, and we have a problem. We are biased when it comes to analyzing the data. We think that things are in a certain way, but in theory they are not, because we're easily lost in the sheer amount of data. One more thing before I finish. I was talking in the previous section about the idea of making mistakes and getting to know yourself so that you can actually open up the so-called flow. One of the things that I did also at some point when I was working a lot was to actually get to know myself. And here you can start by investigating at least what type of personality you are, because this will help you a lot in understanding in the way you work, and it can give you some hints and cues on how you can actually get better. For me, it was actually a big breakthrough. I discovered the whole thing through something which is called 16 personalities. Later on, I did also some Persolog tests, and in the end, I also did a test which was measuring something else, my motivations factors, called RMP. But from the Persolog, I learned the most because it was there. They actually mentioned a lot of quirks and stuff that can explain me and actually accept the way I am. And this is very important. When you actually find your flow, it's all about acceptance. It's not about fighting, it's about acceptance. And once you have this, you'll figure out that things work much better. Last thing, okay, I go through my day, I track my time. How do I manage procrastination? Which I'm going to cover also in a separate episode, but I'm using Pomodoro, because Pomodoro gives me this idea of I have a block of time. In my case, my Pomodoro is slightly longer than the original one, because this is exactly what I found. This is the one that works for me. So again, all the methods and all the ideas, they are like the starting point. You have to find out what works best for you later on. And of course, you're going to make mistakes on the way. But with my Pomodoros, they are 40, 45 minutes, and then I take a break. And I can pull a lot of these Pomodoros throughout the day. And if I pull too much, I'm going to be tired. And this is one of the other things. If you actually measure your time, you have a system, you can take some statistics, and at the end of the week, if you feel really bad, you can see how much did actually work. Exactly. Maybe too much. Maybe I should take a break. Maybe I should do something else. Another thing about the estimation, as we were entering the trail here, there was a pretty steep ascension. We had to go through the summit, and my lovely girlfriend, she asked me at some point when we were going down from the summit, how far are we? And I looked on the GPS map and I'm like, 15%. And she got scared because we've been like 2.5 hours on the way, and we still have to get back to the car before it gets dark, even though we have flashlights and a tent and everything. But that's the thing, we are very bad at estimating. Yes, right now we've walked 1 hour 15 minutes. We're halfway through. Yes, so we'll be at the car 1.5 hours or something like that. So this is going to work out just well. But that's the thing, more information, getting the metadata, and you'll be surprised how much of the extra stuff lies there. So I hope this is going to give you some kind of an idea on how to optimize your logging so that you can actually get better. It will maybe give you some tools on how to optimize your day. And at this point, I would like to invite you to the next section. Okay, so you could ask me now, what are the key takeaways from this part of the episode? Well, so far I've been talking about obvious things, and naturally you could have a question, okay, where's the win situation? How does it work, and so on. You could even say, hey, there is plenty of companies that don't do the obvious things that you mentioned, and they are still extremely successful. Well, there is a lot of companies that don't do this. I would even say there's plenty of companies that don't do this. But think about the potential they could unlock if they actually started doing it. Think also about the potential you could unlock if you started focusing temporarily on those small obvious things and actually, putting some order into it. The things I'm talking about, or the approach I'm taking here, is something that was invented actually by the guys from Toyota, and the method is called Kaizen, which means that you are stopping for a moment, recording a lot of data and looking at a problem and figuring out the most optimal way of solving it. So this is exactly what I'm doing here. I'm actually showing you on my example not only the best practices that worked for me, but also I'm showing you the way on how you could solve these things on your own, because your situation is most likely different. Oh, it's now windy. It's different, and yes, you will have to take into account your own circumstances, your own input, your own data, your own variables. So yes, it's all about getting the right data, taking a look at it, and once you're ready with that, from that data, get the information. Apply it to your life, and within a couple of weeks, this is going to become a habit, and then it will just be a natural part of you. Of course, what you have to remember is, at some point, you will take it for granted. So it will be a good idea to have a list of all of those important things and get back to it every now and then, especially in situations that might be a little bit hard when you have more deadlines that you can manage, because let's be honest, this thing also happens. So we have covered, or I have covered, the whole thing about writing down things in order to memorize them. I've showed you a lot of tricks on how to write down things that you don't necessarily have to remember, but you need to recall them later on, and it's not really necessary that you have them in your head. And this is also one of the key takeaways. Put into your head only the stuff that matters. Everything else that you can throw away and have a different system that will remind you about this, just do it from there. So, hit the follow button and see you in the next part of the episode.